Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Fraternity Foodie, episode number 45. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. We call these episodes Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like good food to bring people together. We have an incredible resource here for everybody today. We're going to be talking about public relations for fraternities, but I felt it was best to have a co-host today, somebody who is also on the Greek University speaking team. He's also the editor of the book, Hazing, Destroying Young Lives. His name is Hank Nuwer. Welcome to the show, Hank.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Excellent. It's good to have you. Now, our interview guest today wrote chapter number 16 in this book. The title of the chapter is Public Relations for Fraternities in Crisis, and his name is Ray Begovich. Ray has a doctorate in education from Ball State University, and if our viewers recognize Ray, it's because of the time that he spent researching for a book, and he actually found some incredible video footage of then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt in a wheelchair, which is a very big deal for the viewers that are familiar with FDR's story. Now, before joining the Franklin College faculty, Ray was vice president of a public relations agency serving nonprofits as well as business clients. So he's got a wealth of information to share with all of us today. Welcome to the show, Ray.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you having me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much. Now, the first question is, I understand that you decided not to join a fraternity at Indiana University in Bloomington. So I guess I have a couple of questions. The first one is, were you a joiner at all while you were in high school and college, so far as clubs and sports went? And then the other question is, what factors kept you from joining a fraternity while you were in college?
It's a great question. I actually transferred to IU in Bloomington, but the first institution I was at as a raw freshman, a friend who was an upperclassman tried to recruit me to his fraternity simply because they wanted someone big and wide to play on their flag football team, and he knew I could fit both of those bills there. And I really didn't know anything about fraternities. I knew my older brother had been in one. He was much older and loved it and had a good time, but never knew any kind of detail. So I asked my older friend what it was like in a fraternity and what you have to do. And he got to the point where he said, well, one of the things you'll do is clean the rooms of the upperclassmen. Case closed. I said, I'm not interested. I said, I can barely keep my own room clean. If you think I'm going to clean someone else's, you're crazy. Looking back on it, I do see that was more of the loner instinct. I was not a joiner. I did do 3 sports: football, wrestling, and track, shot put, and discus in high school, and I was absolutely mediocre at all 3, but not a joiner in terms of clubs or any kind of groups like that. So believe it or not, I decided not to join the fraternity because I wasn't going to clean anyone else's room. I understand now that has a little bit of a deeper message. The need to join something was not that strong in me in order that I would perform some kind of ritual like that.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It really makes me think about all the good men and women that could have joined fraternities and sororities, but they didn't for one reason or another. It could be the bad PR, like we're going to start talking about shortly. But it just makes me think about all the great people that maybe should have been in a fraternity or sorority, but never had that opportunity. So that's what I think about when you tell me that story.
Sure.
Now, there are many stakeholders for fraternities, as we know. In the book, Hazing, Destroying Young Lives, you describe a group of people that are known as publics. And this is parents, students, members of the fraternities in question, members of other fraternities on campus, faculty, staff, alumni, neighbors, community leaders, advocacy groups, journalists, social media, politicians, government agencies, lawyers, police officers. I'm already dizzy now. So the reality is, on the ground, our fraternity chapters are run by college students. So if you advised a chapter, how would you advise college students to be sure that they are putting their best foot forward with all of these stakeholders, or publics, as you call them?
Yeah, it's you point out a very important challenge. Any organization, any business, any group needs to work to try and identify their target audiences. To whom do you want to do PR at? To whom do you want to deliver your messages, and to whom do you want something back from in return? And we start by trying to, first of all, figure out what we want to make happen, but then we try and figure out this list of target audiences, and it's very challenging. It's very easy and simple to say, well, it's everybody, it's the general public. And I think, as opposed to some PR pros and educators, that you can indeed have a target audience as the general public, because we can't predict everyone who may receive our messages and who may benefit from our messages and who may be able to help us in some way. But if we can develop a more targeted list, even though the list is large, it helps us determine what strategies and tactics we will use. So for example, with the large list that you mentioned, I would suggest breaking it down into 3 sections: primary, secondary, and then tertiary audiences. It is nearly impossible to reach everybody, but let's at least try and hit our target audiences, which includes members and the people in our immediate community, our neighbors, and it could vary in fraternity to fraternity. But again, try and figure out precisely whom we want to reach, and then prioritize our audiences to save time, to save money, and to be practical and efficient.
Ray, maybe to summarize, could I ask, are you saying that one message doesn't fit all, that you have to take that message and rephrase?
Yeah, you do, and that's the exact point that a lot of people miss. You do want consistent overall messages that you deliver to all groups. You can look back, people as old as me, you can look back to political campaigns such as the Clinton campaign in '92, and the overall arching message to all audiences was, it's the economy, stupid. Yet again, additional messages have to be delivered to different audiences in addition to the overarching message. And so it points out the true complexities of public relations. Like you say, one message does not fit all. We tend to fall into a trap of what I call just do it syndrome because of Nike's brilliant use of the slogan and the swoosh logo. Everyone's looking for that magic single message or simple combinations of words and visuals. And it really doesn't work that way because we have these brilliant examples of just do it. Everyone's looking for a slogan. Everyone's looking for a phrase. And, bottom line is, first of all, Nike made good shoes. Second of all, they had millions of dollars to support that. And most of us don't have that in our organizations, in our businesses, to support the talent to create and sustain those logos and then to deliver those messages. So I say, stop looking for the just do it. Stop looking for the magic bullet, the killer line that will change everyone's mind. It's a myth.
Okay, thank you.
Now, proper training for our chapter PR chairman is certainly one area that our chapters need to work towards. I think the elections process, as I see it, needs to be examined for PR chairman to ensure that we have the right skill set for that position. So when you headed the PR program at Franklin College, I've been told that you emphasized professionalism, you emphasized ethical conduct, putting together great online and what we call hold in your hands portfolios. So what types of skills would you want this PR chair to have? And is there a place to go for these students to get additional training?
Yeah, there are excellent options. The first thing you need in terms of training is a commitment to communications ethics. And the way we try and train students to do that is we talk about three kinds of ethics. Our personal ethics, for one, the three P's of ethics, personal being the first one, professional, and then practical. So personally, you have to be proud of what you did that day in terms of communications. Some people call it the head on the pillow rule. Am I proud of what I did today when I put my head on the pillow at night? So whatever values you were raised with, whatever values you obtained and learned on your own, I say stick with those values. You don't want to be lied to. You don't want to be misled. You don't want to be tricked. You don't want to be conned. You don't want to be scammed. So don't scam anyone else. Stick with your personal ethics. The second is professional. So I think students can go to the, very simply, ethics codes, which are available from two good organizations. And these are what professional PR people follow. One is the Public Relations Society of America. You can look up their website and their code of ethics, and you'll see this is what the profession says you should be doing. And another one is the International Association of Business Communicators, also a very good code of ethics. So personal and then professional ethics, we can learn from both. And the third, we have to try and deliver messages about the practical. So personal, professional, and practical, it's just no good. It's not practical. It's not helpful to mislead, to lie, and deliver unethical or misleading or spin messages. It comes back and it backfires. We often see national figures, politicians, do this, and they do it successfully, but for the most part, for regular businesses and for organizations that intend to do good for their members or societies, that kind of unethical kind of spin, win at all costs, is not very helpful. And the other thing, in addition to ethics, is writing. It sounds so basic, but we have to be very clear and very simple and very quick. I just finished reading a book about the development of the famous poster that the British Ministry of Information did in World War II, called "Keep Calm and Carry On," which we all know on coffee mugs and posters and in all kinds of various takeoffs on that. Well, there it is. A very simple, clear message in times of distress. That poster actually did not get used in World War II. It was just kind of warehoused and then was rediscovered many years later, and now is a pop culture icon. But that's the kind of messaging we have to try and get across. And that's just an example of good writing and good design, frankly.
Your answer is really good.
Mike, I was going to jump back to you. I think what Ray was saying, particularly about values at the beginning, but all of it, just certainly has to resonate with you and the message that you've been trying to put out with fraternity people about telling the truth, addressing, and especially the importance of knowing values and sticking to them. Mike, what would you say about that?
I would say his answer is right on, because really, when you think about fraternities and sororities, they're all about values and ethics. And I think when I think about a fraternity chapter that perhaps has a very low pledge to initiate ratio, for example, the reason why students leave these types of organizations is because of misaligned expectations, right? We say that we're all about scholarship. So if that's true, then your GPA better be better than the average male or female student on that campus. Otherwise, you're giving misaligned expectations. And when they find out that your GPA is actually below the student average on campus, then they start saying, well, wait a minute, you said one thing and you did the other, I'm leaving. So the answer that he gave, I think, has a lot of it really does resonate with me and with other fraternity and sorority students that are listening right now.
Okay. I'll jump to the next question then. A great answer, Mike. Ray, the question here is, what can be the right budget for a PR chairman and undergraduate? As you know, they don't have the deepest pockets. And I was thinking of you and my favorite cup that I use for tea. You've been used to doing.
How ironic.
A coincidence.
We're weird. First Amendment geeks.
You've been used to putting on campaigns with your students, and in these tough times, not with the largest budgets. Let's go back to it then. So think of this PR chairman, an undergraduate, sophomore, junior, who's trying to get the message out for maybe the most bang for that buck, limited buck that he has.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would love to say to be ideal to have $2,000 to spend over an academic year. How would you spend that? Well, you'd spend it on posters, on technology, on really good photography, maybe a little bit on graphic design and infographics, and you'd spend it on special events, the catering, and maybe any kind of rental fee for a space, or you'd spend it, a little bit of it at least, on a guest speaker. The reality is, and I certainly don't know the ins and outs of fraternities like both of you do, but I do know a lot about nonprofit PR, and the budget for PR is often zero. And I understand those realities. So in those cases, we can still get across messages. We can at least do some kind of social media, intranet communications. If there are internal group digital platforms that fraternities use, that is actually a very efficient way and a good way to reach young people these days. Surprisingly, what I have noticed about campaigns on campus, sometimes despite all the wonderful PR tactics that we use, word of mouth, old-fashioned word of mouth, a suggestion, an idea, hey, let's go hear from a peer, really works well.
Okay,
So
so
you can do it.
Okay, it sounds to me what you're saying also is maybe the chairman should not try to do it himself or herself. You're in a community of fraternity people with many different skills, to go back to what you said about design and writing, brainstorming. Would you advise them to use the other people in their chapter?
I think so. It's likely there's someone in there who is an art major or a broadcasting major who has some skills, a journalism or a PR major who can do a little writing. So that's someone to tap into. Also, almost all campuses have some kind of, large campuses or campuses with communications majors, they have some kind of nonprofit public relations agency that tries to give the students practical experience, and they're always looking for projects. And so if you can become a client, you get you can get pretty sharp communications advice, and then tactical executions, be it a short video, a photo slideshow, a podcast, a poster, event planning. You can get those done very cheaply, and you'll get it done by people who know at least that target audience of students on campus.
Great answer, thank you. Back to you, Mike.
Yeah, let's continue down that road. Real metrics is another area that I think many chapters need to work towards. So how would you define real metrics? And in your opinion, what metrics might a chapter use to determine if their PR efforts are successful?
Wow. Mike, you have tapped into one of the largest challenges in the whole public relations profession, and that is, how do we measure our true value? How do we measure our true impact? Now, we know as a self-evident truth that communication helps, that it's good, that it can give results. We have all kinds of anecdotal evidence of that. But hard numbers, the metrics, the statistics are actually hard to come by these days, and always have been. It's a little easier if you can measure social media metrics, whether it's likes or shares, and you can even break down positive or negative comments on social media posts. So there are a lot of free metrics you can get in social media, but that only takes you so far. So if we do a typical kind of advertising or marketing campaign, and our metrics are essentially sales figures, that is still hard to do, but it's something measurable. When we're talking about the hearts and minds and eventually changes in behavior in a positive way, it's nearly impossible to measure. So what I try and do is come up with one sentence outcome statements. And this outcome statement is essentially something we want to make happen. And then we try and collect evidence to see whether or not we made that happen. Now, an outcome statement does not have to represent some kind of universal truth that is provable and acceptable to everyone in the world, like a statistic or a simple numerical metric might be, but it's what we agree upon. What we agree upon is as having accomplished this outcome within our chapter, within our campus, within our national fraternity organization, what we agree upon, even though someone else can look at that and go, well, you guys didn't really do that. Well, unless we have the big budgets to do pre-campaign a statistical survey and then a post-campaign statistical survey, we really can't measure change. And research is extremely expensive, and that's why a lot of businesses don't do it. Every PR textbook talks about research being the first step, but many, many businesses and non-clients just won't do it because of the expense. It's the ideal to get the kind of metrics you're talking about, but we don't have the budgets for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess the question goes to me next then. I'm going to tap into your national reputation as a public relations person, and you go to AEJMC conferences, but you've also been a practical vice president in a PR agency. So the question is going into crisis communications. And I think this is something very important for fraternity executives. As hard as some undergraduates work, as hard as the national leaders work, things go wrong at times. And often that's what the public thinks about in terms of fraternities. My first question, should something go wrong, do you recommend that the undergraduates speak about it, or that the national have a single spokesperson? And then second, maybe taking an example might be a fire in a fraternity house, a hazing incident. How should professionals handle crisis communication?
Yeah, crisis communications is an often overlooked area in terms of organizations, but it's certainly not overlooked by the PR profession. We teach and we preach that everyone should have a crisis communications plan of some sort, and that plan should be practiced at least once a year, at least run through what we call a tabletop scenario. How might we handle this? Who handles what part when this happens? And then usually, ideally, after a tabletop exercise, we try and stage some kind of crisis and then go through it in real time. And you learn a lot by practicing. So a crisis communications plan that is simple and actionable and meaningful is every organization, large or small, should have that. Be it a natural disaster or some kind of internally caused problem. Now, in terms of who should be the spokesperson, our advice, and not everyone agrees with this, but it should be the absolute top person in the organization. So if there's a fire at a fraternity on a college campus, it goes to the president of the university, because that is the face, that is the voice, that is the official messaging entity of an organization when something very serious happens. Don't leave that to the fraternity president. Don't leave that to a dean of students. It's too big of a deal in case of a natural disaster or some kind of crime like a terrorist attack or something like that. So your CEO, your top person, or a spokesperson at the national level, and it has to be the national president or a board chair who speaks in that kind of situation in terms of the first official responses. And then, yeah, it's okay for the fraternity president to also speak in this situation, to go ahead and respond to journalists' questions. And whether you're the CEO, the president nationally, or of a local chapter, there are certain things we do. We, first of all, express truthful and honest compassion and sorrow. Sometimes attorneys don't want us to come outright and apologize, but that doesn't mean we can't express our heartfelt grief, which is simply stating the truth in these situations. And then we're very careful about not speculating about what happened, especially in these early days of a crisis. You don't know what happened. We just don't have the knowledge. We can say, here are the 3 things we know. It sometimes works best to do simple communication in terms of 3. We know 1, we know 2, we know 3. And from here, a common question you get from journalists or from the public is a good question. What are you going to do to stop this in the future? And so we try and have in our crisis plans, what 3 things are we really going to do? And again, it's not made up spin. It has to be substantive. It has to be real. We're going to do this, we're going to do this, and we're going to do this. Even if it's, we're going to investigate, and then we're going to reform, and then we're going to tell everyone about it. Even if it's simple like that. So, and always in a crisis, even though you have a good crisis plan and you've practiced it, never works. It never goes by the script. And it's a dynamic situation, and it's usually plan B that actually gets implemented and not the perfect crisis plan.
Okay, that's a great answer. And Mike, I'll go to you again. I mean, you weren't the journalist, but you were the head of a national organization. And I'm not sure if you had to deal with any crisis, so it might be speculative. But do Ray's words resonate with you?
They do. I think Ray talking about practicing the crisis communications plan is key. I know a lot of chapters might not be doing that on a regular basis. Many fraternity and sorority headquarters have a crisis communications plan in place. So I would strongly advise, look to your fraternity or sorority headquarters for what they suggest. Practice that on an annual basis. You always have new leaders that are coming into positions. So as the new leaders come in, it's time to practice. We have somebody new who's at the helm, and sometimes we lose those pieces. So I would just say, make sure you follow your headquarters and some of the things that they recommend. I think that's really important, because sometimes students they don't have the training necessary. And I think that is the piece that's missing. Whereas the fraternity headquarters or sorority headquarters, they have immense training in working with the media. So, so those are some of the things that I would consider and look to that plan, whatever it is your headquarters is giving you. I guess as a follow-up, some fraternities, I'm thinking about Phi Delta Theta, for example, that you have at Franklin College, they sponsor national hazing awareness campaigns and awards, including hazingprevention.org's Hank Nuwer Anti-Hazing Hero Awards every year. So do you think that those kinds of steps are steps in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. I think that's extremely, extremely positive. Not only in the terms of the messaging, which I think is effective as those kinds of programs reach people, but for the students involved in planning those events and developing those events. You learn by doing, and so I think they have that. Those kind of events have value on two levels. One, we're getting messages out that are important to others. Plus, while we're engaged in the event planning and the award selection process, for example, we're learning more, and our behavior and the people we interact with, their behaviors as well benefit, I think, from such efforts. So I think those are great efforts.
Okay.
Excellent.
And Ray, I'm a speaker now for Greek University, and I've gone to about 130 schools, maybe 200 presentations. One of the things I hear over and over from students when they come up afterwards is, all we ever hear is negative publicity about the Greeks. All we ever hear are stereotypes. Do you agree that's so, or do you think that Greek life is getting its message out, that people know about some of the good things that fraternities do?
Yeah, that's that's another important issue that you raise, Hank. One of the elements of my response would be pop culture. Even, you know, I see on at least my cable system, Animal House is airing again this weekend. So pop culture says this is what fraternities are. As you and Mike know, the realities can reflect that in some percentage, but not the majority, certainly. So we're battling pop culture. We're battling social and psychological phenomena that are really complex to not only understand on one level, but then to change on another level. So yes, I think doing as like fraternities tend to do is try and promote the good things they do, even if no one's listening. Again, there are some audiences that are listening, that do get these messages, and there's the value of understanding those messages and then shaping them and communicating them within the organization. Now, in terms of journalists and the news media covering only negative things, that's a reality we're just going to have to accept and live with. You know, a common old phrase used to describe journalism is that journalists don't do stories about all the trains that go happily along their way every day and reach their destinations without any problems. A train falls off the tracks, then that's news. So that is just the reality we have to deal with. And if we, at a national or local level of Greek life, expect that to change, we need to realize it's not going to change. That is just not the nature of news at all. And the first three letters of the word news spell something new. So raising a little money for a fraternity is not new. Unfortunately, a tragic death or some kind of tragic information, that's new. And it's going to get covered. And it deserves to be covered. The public should know about these things.
Yeah, and I've been following with the coronavirus crisis, fraternities helping out delivering food, for example, to the elderly in their community. It doesn't sound like an important story, but it is. It says something about the character and values of the young people in the fraternal organization.
Yeah, it certainly does. And remember what we have these days that we wouldn't have had in my day if I had been in a fraternity. We have storytelling tools of our own now. We don't have to rely on the media. We can produce and distribute content online. And remember, even if audiences are small, it's still okay to reach some audiences, and it's still important to reach key target audiences members, even though they might be not as large as we would hit on a national news outlet. And so I think those kinds of stories are indeed inspirational, but again, they're not going to get the kind of coverage that a tragedy will.
Okay, and so that goes into the other part of the national and the local chapter advisors. Make sure that you reflect the values and your behavior reflects. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So given those limitations, Ray, that you're talking about here, what do you say to Greek advisors, for example, alumni that are working with the chapters, people like Hank and I, for example, that work and speak to fraternities and sororities? What do you say to the many of us who want to improve the behaviors of fraternity members?
Right. First of all, I'm reluctant to give any kind of prescription or strong counsel because I'm not steeped in the kind of research that you and Hank are in. So everything I say comes with a caveat. We need to study it. We need to really think it through. However, the key idea that I try and express in Hank's book is we have to stop thinking about external messages in terms of helping the PR image of fraternities. My chapter in the book states that we should turn all our public relations talents, budgets, efforts, strategies, and tactics internally. We have to do internal campaigns in the fraternity world, in the Greek world in general, to stop hazing. So we have a decades-old saying in public relations that if your company makes bad widgets, no amount of PR is going to help you. So you first of all have to make the bad widgets. So all the talent, all the professionalism, all the communications tools that are available to us today, we have to drive home the message of anti-hazing. And it is not a one shot fits all. It is not a coming up with a witty line like just do it. It is a sustained, assertive campaign that hammers until we see some significant change. When the behaviors improve, and I'm sure both of you know, there's no way to make things perfect. There are always going to be trouble with things like hazing. But when we reduce it significantly, then the exterior image of the Greek community improves. So my advice is stop worrying about saying, hey, we're really good at supporting scholarship. We're really good philanthropists. Now, those are messages to keep doing, but that's not going to be a level of change. The level of change has to come from inside. And that's the internal public relations campaign within the Greek world. What happens also when you do things internally, they also become external. Perhaps some national news organization does decide to do a story about this internal campaign that's been going on for years to try and stop this. Well, then that helps our image outside as well. So again, with the caveat that you can't just offer simplistic PR solutions and think it's a panacea. You have to do research, you have to do focus groups, you have to talk with experts and see what they think and what they've tried. But that's my advice from learning mostly from Hank and from Hank's writings. I think we need an internal PR campaign that is massive and that is sustained over a good number of years to say that this is unacceptable.
Okay, and then what about the other, the positive? We've had a National Hazing Prevention Week for many years with great involvement by the Greeks and the universities themselves, national organizations such as Mike's and others. How do you feel about something like that, a National Hazing Prevention Week? How do you make the most out of something like that?
Yeah, again, I think that's it's a fine idea in the sense that a national week like that provides at least some kind of a news peg to the media. Here's a calendar event at least that brings people together and perhaps gives us something to write about. And again, the planning, the involvement, the engagement of all kinds of people and groups, and that can certainly help. The problem is you're competing with all kinds of weeks and days, and every good cause has a week, has a day, and you're just one of 250,000. And so the competition is very tough. So I say, yeah, let's keep doing those things. These are positive in ways, but again, not expect it to be the be all end all killer problem stopping tactic that we use.
That's a good answer. Thank you.
Yeah, this has been great, Ray. You've given us a lot to think about, so I certainly appreciate all your time. Now, of course, we do love good food here at Fraternity Foodie, and I read that you love outdoor festivals and the food that you can get there. My sense is outdoor festivals probably won't be happening for some time now. So I do know you love Italian food. Interestingly enough, I had a friend on a recent trip to Indianapolis. He took me to Buca di Beppo. So when you are able to go out to eat in Indianapolis, what's your favorite place to go?
Well, that's a great question. My advice to visitors to Indianapolis is to go to Shapiro's Delicatessen. It is an authentic kind of New York style deli experience. It has been in Indy for decades, and people love to go there. It's cafeteria style. The portions are great. It's informal. You will see people from all walks of life. You'll bump into a celebrity there at some point if you go often enough, and it's just a delight. And the Buca di Beppo chain is fascinating to me on two levels. One, because I love the food, especially the giant meatballs, and we just had carryout a few days ago from Buca. And second reason is because the decor in this Italian restaurant chain looks exactly like the decor in most of my aunt's houses when I was growing up. So despite my last name Begovich, the Italian influence is stronger on my mother's side. So find a Buca if you're traveling, if you have one in town. It is quite a treat. It's a little pricey. However, if you want pure advice, and I'm not shy or giving any caveats on this, if you want pure advice on ideal classic haute cuisine, Mike, it's the Chicago hot dog. And there is nothing like it. There are some rules though. So if you're at a conference or you get to visit Chicago for some reason or other, you have to go to a small stand. Ideally, it's Gene and Jude's in Franklin Park, Illinois. There's no place to sit. It's just a constant line all day long. You get your carry-out hot dog. And if you go to a Chicago hot dog vendor, there are a couple rules you need to follow. First, watch carefully how the people are coming out. If you see ketchup being dispensed or people with ketchup on their hot dogs, it's not a real Chicago hot dog. Just won't use ketchup. It may indeed be against the law in Chicago. I'm not sure. The other thing is watch and see if they come out of the place with their hot dog separated from their French fries. Not legal. So the hot dog and the French fries have to come wrapped in the same greasy wax paper together. They're all mushed together. Those two elements, no ketchup, and the fries and the hot dog in one greasy wrapper, you know you have a true Chicago hot dog.
Well, Ray, you're from Chicago, and I remember with religious fervor, you sent me to a dive down low below some tracks called the Billy Goat. Can you tell Mike and the viewers a little bit about the Billy Goat?
The Billy Goat is a legendary Chicago institution, and it is underneath Michigan Avenue, the Magnificent Mile in Chicago. It's across the street and under Michigan Avenue from where the Chicago Tribune used to have its headquarters, and it was a hangout for many, many journalists. And it's a real dive bar, but has such charm. It was made famous by the Chicago columnist Mike Royko, who wrote about it now and then in a very humorous kind of way. And then in the early days of Saturday Night Live, John Belushi made it famous as a place where you get the cheeseburger. And it's an absolutely charming place, and packed with tourists because it has been such a media icon over the years. I've taken students there and suggested to them while we're waiting in line, go ahead and order a California chicken salad, and just to see the reaction of the people behind the counter. No, cheeseburger chips, and that's what you get at the Billy Goat. It's a delight.
Well, Hank was right. You are the perfect guest for Fraternity Foodie. There's no question about that. I got a real education here today, as did our listeners. So, Ray, where can people go to read more about your work?
Well, not a whole lot of places just yet. I am working on 2 books simultaneously, and they're not done yet. I don't crank them out the way Hank can, and actually nobody does. But one book is a biography of Elmer Davis, who was a Franklin College graduate and a native of Indiana, who became the director of the Office of War Information during World War II for Franklin Roosevelt. And then later in the 1940s and early 1950s on ABC radio, became a very early and very staunch opponent of McCarthy and McCarthyism, and showed a lot of courage, which was tough to do in those days. And the other book I'm working on, which is very far from done, is a book about the D-Day news releases. We say journalists write the first rough draft of history. I say, well, PR people write the first rough draft of history. So a lot of what we know about D-Day came from military public affairs officers and writers who had been in large part journalists in the previous life. And from the National Archives, I have a marvelous collection at home of the original news releases and communiques about the D-Day invasion and those early days of the Battle of Normandy that eventually led to turning the tide of World War II. So we're looking at PR history related to World War II is my area of special focus and interest.
Okay, and Mike, I can attest that Ray really gets into his work because we both took students to France on a educational trip some years ago. It was so meaningful to me. Ray took us, his idea, to the D-Day battlefield, in Normandy. And my dad, who had been at Utah Beach, came in on an LST. We came there and we saw the bunkers where the Germans had been. We saw the cliffs where the Rangers had to go up into German machine gun nests. And I saw Ray's passion there for the topic. So I can attest that when he gets into a topic, he does it with his whole heart and soul.
Yeah, it was very moving. And what's even more moving than being there on those beaches in Normandy is being there with young college students and see their eyes well up with tears because they know what happened there and they appreciate that sacrifice very much. And that was inspiring for both of us as well.
It was.
Wow, this has been fascinating. I really appreciate your time, Ray, being with us today. Hank, you're an all-star as always. Thank you so much for being my co-pilot today. And thank you to our listeners. If you found us some value in today's interview, please share this with others that might want to listen. I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next episode of Fraternity Foodie. Bye for now.